Izzy didn't come alone, of course. With her was Max, her service dog, a golden retriever with the gentlest eyes you've ever seen, and a sense of loyalty deeper than instinct. Trained to assist with everything from dropped pencils to anxiety attacks, Max wasn't just a dog, he was a lifeline. Prescribed by Izzy's specialists, protected by federal law, and adored by everyone who spent even 5 minutes with him, Max had become part of our heartbeat. And that's why what happened next wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't a neighborly disagreement. It was an attack on the very thing that gave my daughter a sense of safety in a world that often moved too fast for her legs to keep up with. But before things exploded, there were signs. Subtle at first, the kind that whisper trouble before it screams. It began with a woman walking up our driveway just 17 days after we moved in. She was tall, mid-50s, with a perfectly styled platinum blonde bob that hadn't moved since 2002, the kind of woman who wore pastel designer suits like armor and sunglasses that never left her face, even in the shade. Her name was Meredith Harrington, a name I would come to know far too well. That day, she didn't introduce herself. She didn't smile. She didn't even look me in the eye. Her entire focus was on Izzy, who was in the front yard, gently walking Max through mobility exercises. Izzy's smile faltered the moment Meredith's sharp voice pierced the air. "Dogs are not allowed in this community. Didn't your realtor give you the documents?" I stepped out of my home office, where I'd been setting up my secure FBI access, and walked toward them calmly, extending my hand. "Dominic Vasquez, we just moved in." Meredith didn't shake my hand. Instead, she thrust a binder toward me and pointed to a section highlighted in aggressive neon. "No pets allowed. Evergreen Estates policy. That includes dogs." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Years in the bureau teach you that power doesn't come from volume. Max isn't a pet. He's a service animal, federally protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act. Your HOA policy can't override federal law. Meredith's face didn't budge, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Everyone says that these days. We've had this problem before. You'll need to provide official documentation by tomorrow. Certification, medical letters, the works. Or you'll start receiving fines. $500 to begin. $100 per day until resolved. Izzy's small voice broke the tension. Max helps me when I fall. He picks things up so I don't have to bend too far. Meredith glanced at her as though she were a crack in the pavement. "This is a premium community," she said, "not a petting zoo." Then she turned and walked off, binder clutched like a weapon of war. I stood there, heart pounding, rage simmering under the surface. But I didn't react. Not yet. Not in front of Izzy. I knew better than to lash out at someone like Meredith. People like her don't crumble from confrontation. They feed off it. No, people like her needed something far more precise. I tucked the interaction into my memory, like a case file beginning to form. It wasn't the first time I'd seen power masquerading as procedure, but it was the first time it had pointed its finger at my little girl. And in that moment, I made a silent promise. Meredith Harrington had just picked the wrong family to mess with. The next few weeks unfolded like a slow, deliberate attack, one that didn't come with raised voices or open threats, but rather with cold paper citations slipped under the door and fines that arrived like clockwork. True to her word, or maybe her warning, Meredith began the campaign. The first citation was for animal waste found near the eastern walkway, which was impossible considering Max was trained to relieve himself only in a designated section of our enclosed backyard. Still, I responded formally and respectfully, submitting proof, photos, and a statement. No reply, only the next citation, this time for excessive animal noise. Max, the quietest dog I've ever owned, never barked unless startled. The violation listed the complaint as occurring at 3:14 a.m., while we were all asleep. I checked our home security footage. Not a sound, not a soul, but none of that mattered. The notices kept arriving, each more petty than the last. Max's harness visible through the garage window, Max being outside with Izzy for more than 15 minutes, even the mere presence of a mobility ramp being questioned as a permanent modification to front-facing property. What I began to understand, with grim clarity, was that this wasn't about dogs or noise or cleanliness. It was about control. Meredith wielded HOA policy like a blunt weapon, and our family, specifically Izzy and Max, had become her target. I responded to each notice with meticulous care, building a paper trail, backing every word with timestamps, medical documents, and ADA references. My FBI instincts had long since kicked in. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was now an investigator, documenting every slight, every threat cloaked in HOA language. I even created a spreadsheet, itemizing each citation with source, date, description, response, and follow-up. I wasn't just playing defense. I was laying the groundwork. Around that time, we found our first real ally, Jasmine Franklin, a sharp-minded corporate attorney who lived 2 doors down. She had a quiet grace about her, the kind of woman who could spot injustice from across the street and wasn't afraid to name it. Jasmine invited Izzy over a few times when I had late calls with the bureau and quickly became someone I trusted. Over iced tea on her porch one evening, she told me, "She does this every year. Always finds someone new." Last year, it was the couple on Saguaro Drive, retirees who added a wheelchair ramp without written permission. Year before that, it was the Patels, whose cousins stayed after a funeral. She fined them into selling their home. I asked why no one stopped her. Jasmine gave me a tired shrug. Fear. Connections. Her husband's golf buddies include the city council, a judge or two. People cave, or move. Easier than fighting. I nodded silently, understanding the game now. But what Meredith didn't know, and what Jasmine was starting to realize, was that I wasn't most people. I wasn't going to move, and I sure as hell wasn't going to cave. Despite everything, I kept my profession vague around the neighborhood. Government compliance, I told anyone who asked. Technically true, but I had learned long ago that discretion wasn't just about safety, it was about strategic advantage. The less people knew, the more they underestimated you, and Meredith had severely underestimated me. Then came the day it all boiled over. A Tuesday afternoon in October, the kind of Arizona day where the sun starts to ease up and the breeze carries a whisper of fall. I was deep into a classified conference call with my task force, analyzing suspicious land purchases and wire transfers tied to potential laundering through real estate. We had reason to believe a string of desert developments were involved in cleaning cartel money, and I was reviewing encrypted files when it happened. Izzy was outside in our courtyard doing her physical therapy, gentle balance drills with Max by her side. Jasmine was sitting across the street on her porch, laptop open, keeping a casual eye on things as she often did during Izzy's sessions. Everything was routine, safe, until it wasn't. The first thing I heard was the shouting. Then came the scream, not the startled kind, but the primal, high-pitched scream of a child in real pain. My heart seized. I ripped off my headset mid-call and bolted for the door. What I saw as I rounded the corner still haunts me. Izzy was on the ground, clutching her arm, face twisted in agony. Max was barking, sharp, frantic barks, while circling protectively around her. And standing just feet away was Meredith Harrington. In her hands was a long metal dog-catching pole, the kind animal control officers use when restraining strays. Her face held no concern, no fear, just cold, self-satisfied indignation. "What the hell happened?" I shouted, dropping to my knees beside Izzy. Her left arm was swelling, the elbow already bruising, held in a position no joint should be. She could barely speak through the sobs, but Jasmine was already there, phone still in hand. She tried to grab Max, Jasmine said, her voice shaking with fury. Izzy stepped in to stop her. Meredith yanked her away. I got it all. I recorded everything. Meredith didn't flinch. Your dog was off leash in a common area. I was enforcing regulations, she said flatly, as though that somehow justified attacking a child. I warned you before. This is what happens when rules are ignored. I looked up at her, my expression unreadable. You broke my daughter's arm, I said quietly. My voice didn't rise, didn't shake. But it was the tone I used during interrogations, the tone that told criminals their time was up. Barely touched her, she muttered, adjusting her designer sunglasses. If her bones are that fragile, maybe you shouldn't let her play unsupervised. She looked down at Izzy like she was the problem. Like Max was a nuisance. Like this whole thing was just an inconvenience. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not in rage. Not yet. What I felt was colder, sharper, a sense of surgical purpose. Meredith Harrington was no longer just an HOA president with a taste for power. She had crossed a line into something else entirely. Something I had trained my entire adult life to deal with. And she had just made herself my next case. I told Jasmine to take Izzy to the emergency room while I knelt beside my daughter, whispered that everything would be okay, and promised Max he had done nothing wrong. Then, without saying another word to Meredith, I stood up and pulled out my phone. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I didn't raise my voice. I called 911 and calmly reported an assault on a disabled minor, giving our address and stating that I had video evidence and a witness on site. Meredith, who had been standing there smugly, began to frown. The name Dominic Vasquez might not have meant anything to her at first, but when I ended the call and texted my FBI partner with a simple message, "Need background check. Meredith Harrington, HOA Evergreen Estates. Urgent." She started to realize something was off. "You're seriously calling the police over this?" she asked, half laughing, half incredulous. "Do you know who my husband plays golf with? The chief of police, the city council president, the mayor's fundraiser committee. This won't go anywhere." I said nothing. Let her talk. Let her unravel. When Officer Rivera pulled up minutes later, someone I'd worked with before on a financial elder abuse case, he showed no sign of recognizing me, just like I hoped. Professionalism always came first. "Sir," he said, clipboard in hand, "can you tell me what happened?" I gave him the summary, pointed to Jasmine's video, and waited while he watched. The footage showed it all. Meredith appearing out of nowhere, swinging the catching pole at Max, and yanking Izzy's arm when she blocked the move. Rivera's jaw tightened. He looked at Meredith and asked her calmly to put down the pole and place her hands behind her back. Her reaction was instant and volcanic. "This is absurd," she barked. "I'm enforcing community regulations. They've been in violation since they moved in. That dog is unauthorized. My husband is partners with Judge Holloway. I'll have your badge." Rivera didn't flinch. "Enforcing HOA policy does not give you the right to physically assault a child," he said evenly. "You are being detained for investigation into felony assault on a disabled minor." As the cuffs went on, her eyes scanned the area, still clinging to the belief that someone, anyone, would come to her rescue. But this wasn't a golf course or a city fundraiser. This was a crime scene. And she had committed the one mistake no amount of social power could undo. She had put her hands on my daughter. Back inside the house, I retrieved my FBI credentials, showed them discreetly to Rivera, and asked that the case be handled strictly by the book. Complete evidence collection, full documentation, chain of custody on the video files, and all medical records from the ER logged in officially. "Understood," he said. He knew what I meant. Any procedural error, no matter how small, could be used later to dismiss or diminish the charges. I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't. When Meredith caught a glimpse of my badge being slipped back into my pocket, her confidence fractured. "You're FBI," she whispered, voice trembling. "Special Agent Dominic Vasquez," I confirmed. "Financial Crimes Division. And you just assaulted the daughter of someone trained to build airtight cases for a living." While Izzy was being examined at the hospital and her arm was being placed in a purple cast, her favorite color, I received a message back from my partner at the bureau. Meredith Harrington had been flagged several years ago in a now dormant investigation involving financial irregularities at First Arizona Trust, a boutique banking firm where she once worked. That case had mysteriously gone quiet after intense political pressure. But now, with a fresh assault charge and the probable cause provided by the attack on my daughter, we had an opening. I asked Jasmine for permission to use her footage and began pulling threads. The HOA's financial records, which were technically public under Arizona state law, showed some odd patterns: large administrative fees, repeated vendor charges to shell companies, and fine revenue that had no matching deposit trails. I saw red flags everywhere. I'd spent 15 years tracing money through smoke and mirrors. Meredith wasn't just a petty tyrant, she was laundering money, and Evergreen Estates was her pipeline. The news cycle erupted within 24 hours. Local stations picked up the story first. HOA, president arrested after breaking child's arm. Then the headline evolved: Service dog controversy, sparks outrage in Arizona suburb. Then it hit national coverage. I didn't seek publicity, but the video was already online, circulating faster than I could control. Meredith's face, once the portrait of suburban leadership, became the face of cruelty. But the real storm hit when the investigation turned official. I submitted a formal tip to the Bureau, referencing Meredith's financial history and the inconsistencies we uncovered in the HOA's bookkeeping. Within days, I had the green light. We opened a full investigation into potential financial misconduct, racketeering, and wire fraud connected to the HOA's management. What we uncovered was far deeper than I expected. Meredith had never really retired from her banking job. She had been forced out under a non-disclosure agreement after several questionable transactions surfaced: large cash transfers, manipulation of account data, and ties to offshore holdings. Her husband, a real estate developer, had benefited significantly from these deals. Now, under the guise of HOA leadership, Meredith had turned Evergreen Estates into a personal empire. Fines were weaponized to force out families who resisted her authority. Vendor contracts were awarded to companies she quietly owned. Community funds were siphoned off into accounts tied to dummy corporations. And some of those corporations had ties to organized crime groups laundering drug money through Arizona's fast-growing housing market. The community meeting that followed her arrest was unlike anything Evergreen Estates had seen. People who had stayed silent for years finally spoke up. An elderly couple recounted how their HOA fines ballooned overnight after installing a wheelchair ramp. A single mother described being targeted for having her autistic child play outside too loudly. A Muslim family detailed the harassment they received over cooking smells during Ramadan. The pattern was unmistakable. Meredith had systematically targeted minorities, the elderly, and families with disabilities. Her rule wasn't about order, it was about exclusion. And now, that rule was over. By unanimous vote, she was removed as HOA president. Jasmine was elected interim president. But this wasn't just about a power shift. It was a reckoning. The community voted to immediately amend its charter to explicitly allow service animals and require reasonable accommodations for all residents with disabilities. The rulebook that had been used as a weapon was now being rewritten as a shield. For the first time since moving in, I saw hope flicker in the eyes of neighbors. People were waking up. And Meredith Harrington, once the queen of control, was now just inmate number 59,218-AR in the custody of the federal justice system. The legal process unfolded like a symphony of long overdue justice. Meredith's defense team, a small army of sharp-suited attorneys known for making problems disappear, tried every angle. They painted the assault as a misunderstanding, argued that the child's injury was accidental, even suggested that Max had posed a danger in a public space. But none of it held. The evidence was too overwhelming. Jasmine's video was clear, unshakable. The screams, the catching pole, the deliberate pull on Izzy's arm. It was all there. Doctors confirmed the fracture was caused by blunt force applied at the elbow. The medical reports aligned perfectly with what was seen in the footage. And most damning of all, Meredith's own words at the scene, cold, dismissive, unrepentant, painted her not as someone acting out of concern for the community, but as a woman wielding authority like a club. The judge overseeing the preliminary hearing didn't mince words. "This is not just about an HOA rule," she said. "This is about an adult with power and status deliberately harming a child, one who is legally protected under federal disability law." And with that, the charges moved forward. Felony assault on a disabled minor, criminal negligence, and reckless endangerment. But that was only the beginning. While Meredith scrambled to mount her defense on the assault charge, the Bureau's investigation into her financial dealings was quietly expanding. With the HOA records subpoenaed, we uncovered an elaborate network of false vendors, inflated contracts, and offshore accounts. She had funneled more than $3.2 million in community funds over the last 5 years into shell companies. Some were registered in Delaware, others in the Cayman Islands, and many were tied, indirectly but unmistakably, to a group of real estate developments under investigation for laundering cartel money. Her husband, once smug and silent, flipped within days of learning the scope of the charges. He cut a deal, turned over emails, access codes, and confidential documentation that cracked open the full scale of the operation. Meredith wasn't just stealing from her neighbors. She was laundering money for criminal networks that stretched far beyond Paradise Valley. In court, as these layers of deception were peeled back one after another, Meredith began to change. Gone was the polished woman with the ice-blonde hair and country club air. In her place stood someone exposed, desperate, and increasingly erratic. During one tense courtroom exchange, she snapped, "Those people don't even belong here. We built Evergreen to be exclusive, not a playground for damaged children and their dogs." The room went silent. Even her attorneys looked like they'd swallowed glass. That outburst did more damage than any piece of evidence ever could. It revealed her rot, not just legally, but morally. The jury took just 6 hours to return their verdict. Guilty on all counts: felony assault, financial fraud, racketeering, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and obstruction of justice. The sentencing came with a sense of closure I didn't know I needed. The judge, addressing a packed courtroom, said, "You used your position to intimidate, extort, and harm. You did so with impunity, hiding behind policy and power. But justice does not serve the privileged. It serves the truth." Meredith was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, 15 for the financial crimes, 5 additional years for the assault on Izzy. All assets tied to her name and her husband's were seized. Her brokerage license was permanently revoked. And in a final twist of irony, the luxurious 7,000 square foot estate she once lorded over was auctioned by the federal government and purchased by a non-profit organization that trained service dogs for children with disabilities. As Meredith began her prison sentence, our family turned the page. Izzy's healing wasn't just physical. Yes, her arm had healed, stronger than before according to her physical therapist. But what amazed me more was her spirit. She returned to school with her signature resilience, supported by a growing circle of friends, and a service dog who had become a quiet celebrity in the neighborhood. Max had always been loyal, but now he carried himself with something more, an air of calm pride, as if he knew that he hadn't just helped Izzy stand, but helped bring down a system of cruelty. At Evergreen Estates, change wasn't just cosmetic. Under Jasmine's leadership, the HOA had transformed. The community rules were rewritten, this time with input from actual residents. Service animals were welcomed. Accessibility wasn't a special exception, it became a right. And for the first time since moving in, our neighbors looked each other in the eye with something more than polite tolerance. There was connection. There was empathy. That winter, Izzy received an invitation from the Bureau's Youth Leadership Academy to speak about disability rights and service animals. She was hesitant at first. She'd always been a little shy. But after some thought, she agreed. I'll never forget watching her take the stage. Purple cast finally off. Max at her side, standing straight and confident. Just because someone needs help doesn't mean they're broken, she told the room full of cadets and agents. My dad says justice is for everyone, not just the ones who run fast or walk tall. Her words rang louder than any badge ever could. The applause was deafening. 3 months later, we received a letter. It was from Meredith. Written in tight, controlled script, it was clearly dictated by a lawyer's hand. Mr. Vasquez, it began, I am writing at my attorney's suggestion to express remorse for my actions toward your daughter. While I maintain that many circumstances were exaggerated, I acknowledge that I should have handled the situation differently. Prison has given me time to reflect. I hope you will inform the parole board of my apology when the time comes. No mention of Izzy's name. No real regret. Just another calculated move. I read it aloud to Izzy, curious what she'd say. She was quiet for a moment, then looked up and said, She still doesn't understand, does she? No, I replied. I don't think she ever will. Izzy asked if she could write back. I let her dictate while I typed. Dear Ms. Harrington, she said slowly, thank you for your letter. I hope prison gives you time to think about why rules exist. Not to hurt people, but to protect them. Max sends a woof hello. He still helps me every day. The doctors say my arm is stronger now where it healed. Sometimes broken things come back stronger. I hope that happens for you too. Sincerely, Isabel Vasquez. That letter sits in my desk drawer. I don't know if I'll ever send it. 6 months after the trial, Evergreen Estates hosted its first annual Service Animal Awareness Day. Izzy's idea. We invited families, partnered with non-profit trainers, and held a small fair in the community park. Izzy led Max in a demonstration showing children how service dogs assist with daily tasks. A little boy raised his hand and said, My grandma has a dog like that. Someone told her she couldn't bring him in the store, but my mum showed them the law. Izzy smiled. Good for your mum, she said. Sometimes we have to teach grown-ups the rules. She didn't say it with bitterness, just clarity. I stood at the edge of the crowd watching her. 1 year ago, she had been lying on the ground with a broken arm, terrified and betrayed. Now she was surrounded by laughter, confidence, and something better than justice. Healing. Max sat beside her, tail thumping gently, always watching, always ready. And that's when it hit me. Sometimes the most powerful kind of justice doesn't come from courtrooms or convictions. It comes when a child who was hurt stands tall again, when a community that was silenced finds its voice, and when a place built on fear becomes a home rooted in dignity. Sometimes broken things don't just heal, they come back stronger, for good.